Alright, let's talk about cilantro. This little herb is actually pretty famous in the holistic health world for helping remove heavy metals from the body. But before you go blending a giant cilantro smoothie, there's a lot you should know, including why it's not the magic bullet some people think. First off, why cilantro? It has certain compounds that can latch onto heavy metals in the body. In technical terms, this is called a chelator, and you can think of it like a tiny claw that grabs onto metal particles that are floating around or are stored in your tissue. The most likely compounds in cilantro responsible for this are the polyphenols and the flavonoids that have a natural affinity for binding metals. Once bound, the idea is that your body can more easily move them through your kidneys or bile and then eventually eliminate them in your urine or stool. So that's the basic theory behind using cilantro for heavy metal detox. And there is some research to back this up. Animal studies show that cilantro can help lower lead and mercury levels. For example, one study found that rats exposed to lead had reduced concentrations in their tissue after being given cilantro extract. There's also small-scale evidence that cilantro may help mobilize mercury and aluminum. But most of this research is pretty preliminary. It's mostly done on animals or in test tubes, not on large human trials. So even though cilantro definitely seems to have metal binding properties, we don't have ironclad data on how well it works in actual people or how much you need to take to see a big difference. But this isn't necessarily my biggest problem with it. Heavy metal research is always a few years behind, and the anecdotal evidence to support cilantro is definitely there, which is why you will see it recommended in holistic health circles so often. But there are also many reports of side effects and people reacting negatively to it. So what's going on here, and should you use it? This brings me to the number one problem with it. Cilantro only chelates. It only pulls metals out of storage, so for example your fat tissue, brain or bones, and then pulls them into circulation. Now this sounds great, but it's actually very risky if that's all you do. Because once those metals are mobilized, they still have to go somewhere. If your liver, kidneys, and gut aren't working well, then you're just stirring up the toxins, and then they will float around in your blood and might get reabsorbed into even more sensitive places. That's when people get symptoms like fatigue, headaches, skin rashes, anxiety, or feeling toxic. In some ways, that's actually worse than if the metals just stayed in place. That's why cilantro alone is not a smart way for a heavy metal detox. You also have to support how your body actually gets rid of this stuff once it has been mobilized. That means you need to support your liver to process the heavy metals and prepare them for elimination. You need to make sure your bile is flowing so the processed toxins can be shipped out. And you need to make sure that you're having regular bowel movements so everything doesn't get reabsorbed. If any of these phases are sluggish, then toxins just get stuck or might be recycled back into your bloodstream. And the more cilantro you take, the more side effects you will create with this. On top of that, the binding effect of cilantro seems to be very difficult to predict and can vary from person to person. So some do great on it while it completely knocks out others. So if you want to try it, here's what I recommend you do. First, understand how heavy metal elimination works and how you can support it. I will link my video on this in the description. Next, support your elimination pathways before you do any sort of chelation. Again, that means working on liver function, bile production, bowel movements, and the like. Once you have all of that in place, you can then start by adding small amounts of chelators to your protocol to see how you react. If you notice headaches, brain fog, or weird symptoms, then that's a sign that you're stirring up more than your body can handle. In that case, you want to scale back and focus on liver support and elimination again. This goes especially for cilantro extracts that you can buy online. These will obviously be more potent, but can also lead to more side effects. Unfortunately, there are no official standardized dosage for cilantro for heavy metal detox. When using fresh leaves, many people start with just a small amount. So let's say 1 teaspoon or maybe 1 tablespoon per day to see if they tolerate it. And then they slowly increase it to about 1/4 to 1/2 of a cup of leaves. So roughly a handful. For cilantro tinctures, a typical recommendation is around 10 to 30 drops once or twice per day, usually in water. Here again, you should start with a lower amount to see if you get any detox symptoms. And then the last thing you need to understand is that cilantro itself is not essential for heavy metal removal. There are many other better chelators out there, and you don't have to use it. Again, it does work for some people, so I don't want to rule it out for everyone. But so many beginners think that all they have to do is take a bunch of it and all their problems will be gone. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that, especially if you have a long history of metal toxicity. Detoxing metals is not just about yanking them out of storage. That's the last step. First, you need to support your body's natural processes so these metals can leave safely without overwhelming your system. Again, I have a bunch of videos on all of that will be linked in the description. I also have a detox masterclass that walks you through everything if you need further guidance, supplement dosages, and more. It's the same framework that I use to get my energy back and clear up my own health issues after years of struggling. Always take it slow and listen to your body.